Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever it is, wherever you are, welcome to the Good Values Podcast. Now, this is the third and final part of my conversation with Paul Heaston. In this episode, we talk about the importance of life drawing, struggling with depression, and lots of other things. I peppered the episode with loads of images and video. I hope you enjoy it. Here's part 3 of my conversation with Paul Heaston. I've also seen that you do practice life drawing, which I really appreciate. It's something which I think is a real important practice for anyone who's trying to learn form, and foreshortening is obviously something which you are confronted with there, and then learning abstraction through, because foreshortening just creates this shape which is no longer a leg, it's kind of it's a weird cylinder, which is just kind of, a trunk of some sort, and it's a strange thing to kind of tackle. And I suppose, I don't know what the question would be. I'm trying to think of how to ask a question around this. Is there anything which you could share, I suppose, about life drawing which you appreciate or which you think is important, or anything which you think why life drawing is kind of showing things to artists who are already well versed in things, and yet it's still always that challenge, I suppose.
Yeah, there is something, you've hit it, I think, right on, that it's always showing something. And there's something about the narrowness of the focus, even though I kind of take it a little bit different directions sometimes. But the idea that here we are with this particular problem, this figure, and it's the same problem every time, but it's never the same experience every time, with light and value and shape and foreshortening. And like you said, these weird shapes of limbs, and I can see the thigh, and the knee is like in front of the thigh. How do you tell other people there's a knee there, and how do you demonstrate this awkward angle, and how do you not run out of space? If you start the head up here and all of a sudden, oh no, that doesn't all fit, how do you figure those things out? It's a microcosm of all the problems you'll encounter anywhere else. But I think because you've got a very straightforward problem, you don't tend to realize that it's helping you get better in every sense of being an observational artist, because you're so focused on the nature of the particular, this is this figure. And so it's sort of a secretly extremely beneficial process to being just in general a better artist. And then the other thing about it that I really enjoy is the social part of it, which people tend to forget about, which is you're surrounded by other artists. And if you step away and check out what everybody else is doing, it's like a classroom full of teachers. And there's all sorts of things you can learn just by being around other people as they're sketching and drawing and painting and doing whatever they're doing. And that's such a resource that I think people forget and take for granted, but it's a wonderful environment to be in. It's everybody's got this, it's not, I wouldn't say euphoria, but there's sort of an intensity, an engagement that sort of takes over the whole space. And everybody's got this common goal. And such an important part of the experience of being an artist. And one thing a lot of artists have is a problem making art after they leave school, if they study art, and it's because you're suddenly on your own, and finding that same level of engagement without a bunch of people with a similar mindset is it's tricky. So returning to a space like that with other people, with the same goals and passions and interests, is really crucial, I think. And that's why I've continued to do it for 20 or so years after having, left school.
Yeah, that's a fantastic style. And I'm going to definitely show a lot of your life drawing that you've posted, because I do love it. And I think it'll be great for other people to see how, different options for life drawings. There's so many approaches to how to try to make marks to represent what you're seeing. What is it you value about art?
I mean, I think maybe superficially, I do enjoy showing people stuff I've done and that, and and seeing people react to it. But I think there's a certain way it makes you feel, or makes me feel, regardless of, because I was doing this without the feedback of social media for a long time. Before that feedback existed, I was content to make art, and I was sort of compelled to make art sort of daily. And I know not everybody is. I think there are a lot of people who want to be artists and for whom the practice, seems very appealing, but who aren't experiencing maybe the same compulsion, and also not the same feedback psychologically that keeps them going as I receive. So I think it is definitely an idiosyncratic thing. It's different for everybody. But in terms of how I feel and whatever feedback that my brain is getting, is very beneficial to my mental health, I think. I mean, there are times when I'm definitely not in the right mindset, for sure. But I've sort of cultivated a way to get into that mindset more and more quickly over, however many years. And I think that's the importance of doing it when you don't want to, gets you quick to that moment where you can find the right mindset quicker. So if you do treat it, I hesitate to say it's like treat it like a job or whatever it is, but if you can find the energy, or you can summon the energy to do it when you're not so-called, quote unquote, feeling it. Like I'm not, I don't believe in the idea of inspiration. I think inspiration is sort of a mythical. It's not a real thing to me. And there are a bunch of famous sort of artist quotes about that. I think the portrait painter Chuck Close said something like, inspiration is for amateurs, the rest of us get to work. And like, and the idea of a muse, or some sort of an external impetus for making art, it just doesn't ring true to my experience making art. I think it's all self-supplied, and you have to work on yourself to find the right mindset to get to that point where it becomes more naturally, it comes more easily. The frustration isn't omnipresent. There's another famous, I think it's another famous Chuck Jones, the director of Looney Tunes cartoons for many years, who said something like, I think everybody has 1,000 drawings in them. And the quicker you get rid of them, the quicker you get to the good ones. I'm paraphrasing, but you have to get them out. You have to exorcise those sort of demons in order to make good art. There's no sitting around thinking about it until the good art comes out. There's only making bad art until the good comes out. And I believe that. I mean, drawing every day it certainly supports that theory, because I have been drawing every day for 15 years, and I can feel myself getting better. I also have this, I'm not where I want to be feeling. And that is another reason I continue. If you can have both of those feelings, is if you feel like you're already comfortable where you're at, I think that sort of stifles your development. But if you only feel like I'm not where I want to be, and you only experience frustration, but not any sense of satisfaction with the work you've already made, that's another problem. So you have to have, there's a sort of a balance, these little competing sort of stair-stepping attitudes, which is that I'm both frustrated and I can appreciate the development or the progress I've made. So you have to be able to still find a reason to continue learning and growing, and it's the interplay of those two concepts that I think is really important.
So you touched on a kind of mental health aspect, and you did post on Instagram a point about having that that kind of attack of anxiety and stress. And I've spoken about it recently on this channel, on my YouTube channel, because that's something which I found quite debilitating. And it just, stopped any progress that I had in every avenue of creation, whether it was reaching out to people for interviews or creating work or teaching or whatever it was. And I was going to ask you, what was your experience with it, and how did you find your way out from that kind of well of kind of depression?
It's, something I've dealt with off and on, I think, for a majority of my life, which was, depression first and then sort of anxiety. And I don't think I was even aware of what the problem was. I wasn't able to sort of give it a name for a long time. But the anxiety and its relationship to my art making, I think art making was sort of a source of escape and a way to completely sort of abandon the present and thoughts that would sort of otherwise intrude on my sort of peaceful happiness or whatever it is. And art making was a way to kind of escape those realities and avoid those realities. But but it wasn't solving any problems for me. As far as my anxiety and my depression went. And the more I've spoken to people about those problems, the more I found, I think it's common with virtually everybody, not with everybody, but there are moments of anxiety and depression, and especially common in people who are artists. And there is a certain relationship that I couldn't begin to understand, maybe between people who are creative and experience these sort of really sort of debilitating struggles with mental illness or mental health. And one of the ways I was sort of able to come out of it was first to acknowledge, that I'm having some problems. And I'd become a father recently, and actually, of 2 children, and I'm a stay-at-home dad. So I had stopped working, and I was teaching and working at an art supply store and doing things, and I'd stopped doing that. I was sort of staying home, indefinitely with children, young children, and that kind of isolation and the inability to kind of talk to anybody during the day, except 2 very young children, and I think it ultimately led to burnout and a lot of stress. And that's not uncommon for, people who are raising kids too. And so acknowledging that problem and seeing somebody about my mental health was really important first step. And so, I started seeing therapists, and then some lifestyle changes that I think were just important. It all had come to a head because it was sort of the beginning of the pandemic, when I was really having these sort of debilitating anxiety attacks. And so some of the changes were just sort of taking time for myself that wasn't art. And it was, so it was taking long walks. And I found myself frequently taking walking 20,000 steps a day, and just long walks where I could sort of think and process without the idea that I was escaping sort of the present, but I could be mindful, I could be present. And, eating a little bit healthier and trying to lose weight and those sort of things, which that's not what everybody needs to do. And I don't want to sort of conflate the idea of being healthy with being mentally healthy. But for me, it was a way to have a sort of a goal or something to focus on, and help me sort of center myself and acknowledge myself and take care of myself, which I wasn't doing, and talking to Linda about it, and communication, though, maybe more than anything, was one of the most sort of helpful things, is because when I could talk to somebody about it, and realized that I wasn't alone, and that I could, once those sort of feelings became expressed, they became less powerful. Once I could talk about the problems I was experiencing. And one of the things my therapist suggested was posting about it. She said, you talk to all these people, you have these thousands of followers, but my relationship is mostly impersonal on social media. And she was saying, yeah, you don't seem to talk much about your personal life or anything. There's not much of a face to the person making the artwork. And maybe if you did that, that might also help, because it's like communicating to these people that might care about you. And so, posting about it was also sort of a therapeutic thing. It was something that sort of helped me, getting that out there, getting that off my chest and talking about it. And then I literally got thousands of comments of people who were experiencing similar things. And everybody, it likes to feel sort of acknowledged and understood. And it's relatable. And it's, when you're not alone and, you're not experiencing all that sort of sense of isolation, it's very therapeutic. So, I think it was very helpful. And also, helpful to understand how many other people were sort of experiencing those same things and had struggled to maybe put a name to it, or acknowledge it to themselves. And so it was it was a useful process, talking about it. And I think I should still talk about it. I'm still in that sort of mindset where it's a challenge to kind of open up and let strangers sort of know what's going on with you. But I found that people were universally supportive. I don't think I encountered any kind of negativity or anybody dismissive, or it's always a scary thing when you talk about things on the internet, because like when you show somebody how to do something, man, there's invariably that you're doing it wrong comment. There's so when you open up like that, there's a vulnerability that I wasn't sure I was able to express. And I was, I was grateful that I sort of found the strength to talk about that and be vulnerable.
I think it's very admirable. It's really brave to do what you've done, because as much as I mentioned in a video what I was going through, it was only incidental. It wasn't a video about that. And your post stood out as it was actually highlighting that issue. And I think there's a bit of a myth about the strong silent type, where people try to suggest that, there should be a degree of stoicism, which, if, to an extent people can practice that, but I think it's unhealthy to bottle up, troubles and stresses that are not being addressed or acknowledged. And that's what you've managed to do. And as much as you don't conflate the two, the kind of body health with the mental health, you did also share, which I think is, again, incredibly brave, your kind of body transformation from being much larger to being much more healthy and slim, which is something which I think a lot of people, including myself, need to start trying to work towards, because of the effect the pandemic had on everyone's diet and exercise and practices. Really, it's just,
Yeah, and it's one of those things, it's been fluctuating for me since then too. And which I understand is sort of the nature of that. And the way we tend to, you go back and forth. And so I'll go through periods both in terms of my mental health and my physical health sort of shifting back and forth, but I think opening myself up and putting it out there was important for me as well as for others. And also, I think on social media, we tend to have this idea that people sort of lead these perfect lives, and we compare them to our own lives, which we know the reality of our own situation, but we don't really know the reality of anybody else's situation. And we think, well, why can't I get my stuff together when this person apparently has, living the dream or whatever it is, or they seem to know themselves and understand themselves better. And it was, I think, important for me to acknowledge that, hey, like this, it's rough stuff, and you're seeing a very carefully curated feed, everybody's is a sort of curated idea. There are some people who are very open, but for me at least, I was very I cultivated this sort of very narrow idea of who I was. Oh, here's this guy who jaws every day, and that's really almost all I was letting people know about. And I was, occasionally sketching my family. But you weren't seeing, a lot of the things that I struggle with. And when people see that and they realize, okay, it's just a facade, and there's real people sort of behind these personas that we sort of start to attribute to them, because we only see so much of their life online. That I think that's an important thing too, especially when it started getting, away from me, the sort of, I go from like 10 or 20,000 followers on Instagram in, 2015 to like hundreds of thousands in a couple of years. And it, and you can't acknowledge everybody's comments, and you can't respond to everybody's messages, and there's a little bit of a distance that you necessarily start to project, because otherwise you sort of start to feel guilty that you can't really engage with everybody the way you'd like to. And so it's like you dread checking your personal messages, and you dread answering questions that you've answered 1,000 times before, because you're worried you're going to get snarky or start copying an attitude and those kinds of things. And and I don't want to do that. Everybody, they're asking the question for themselves, that the first time they've sort of encountered the thought, they type it out, and they're putting themselves out there. And it's, you don't want to be the jerk who's like, read the comments, or whatever.
Yeah.
So, it's a tricky thing, and it feels a little overwhelming sometimes. And I think some of that led to the sort of anxiety issues I was having too, was this sort of unexpected level of sort of popularity and attention that I wasn't necessarily comfortable with. I've always been somebody who's kind of, at a birthday party, I get shy if it's my birthday. I'm like, there's a lot of attention, and I don't want to be the center of attention all the time. But I was putting these, you like the positivity of it, you like some of the engagement, some of the response, but on the other hand, it can feel, it sounds like a complaint, and I don't want it to be a complaint, but it's a lot to take in sometimes.
Yeah.
And you feel like I'm just a normal person, like any of these people asking questions. I don't know why I should be getting so much attention. It seems a little ridiculous.
A bit overwhelming, I suppose.
Yeah, it's overwhelming, but in good and bad ways. I mean, part of you, the reason you keep doing it is, well, I enjoy the attention, but in other ways, you're like, well, maybe, it has its negatives, and you don't want to seem ungrateful too. There's lots of little sort of lines to walk in the social media scape. Fortunately, I think the art world is a lot less harrowing than some of the other people that what they have to deal with. So yeah. I'm fortunate there that most everybody's pretty supportive, and they're not particularly I don't know what it is. The internet, there's not a lot of online abuse, I feel like, in the art communities, as far as what I've seen in other places. So
you've got a very healthy account. I can definitely see very nice and supportive comments, and your posts don't seem to garner any kind of attention that would cause drama or controversy or anything.
I would hope not. And the other day I did make a flip comment about an artist, and it wasn't particularly nice, but it wasn't mean. But somebody had asked me about them on Twitter, and I won't say who the artist was, but I think that artist got upset. And this is an artist who's much more popular than I am, and I think in a sense I thought, oh, I'm just punching up, and I wasn't particularly. I was kind of matter of fact about what I thought about their art. Not everybody's a fan of everybody, but I realized that maybe I should have just sort of kept those thoughts to myself. And, and so it was those learning experiences where I was like, maybe I was living a little too full of my own thoughts about my value as an artist. And
strange that way. I mean, I suppose I would like to, I suppose I'd like to communicate to any audience who's watching, if anyone criticizes your art, it's the art that's being criticized, not the artist. And I would try to encourage people to take advantage of that, because you very rarely get criticism from people as much as you may need it. Sometimes people will just be supportive, which is very sweet, but sometimes you need a critique or kind of, someone who's just not quite as gushing over your abilities, because it can help you grow and to criticize your own work and to analyze your own shortcomings. But I do appreciate how egos are always going to be, kind of tethered to us to some extent as well.
Yeah. And if I could add to that thought too, I think it's important to have spaces where it's understood that maybe criticism is welcome. And that's one of the problems, one of the challenges with a lot of these online sort of hubs of, people posting their work, is that there's not really an explicit set of rules about, what comments can and can't do. I find that on YouTube, maybe people are a little bit more frank. On Instagram, they're a lot more supportive. And Twitter basically is just sort of meanness all the time. Criticism is expected, if not, invited. And so, it is, yeah, I agree with you. It would be nice to be able to hear some constructive criticism in a sort of a safe space where you understand, okay, this is not personal. This is welcome. And this is this is to help people grow as artists, or, or whatever it is. And it's not always sort of, the situations don't always sort of present themselves for those kinds of things to happen. But the problem with a lot of art spaces that are more sort of designated for those places, like ArtStation and DeviantArt and whatever, is that Instagram, it's art. My art is seen by people, everybody, right? And not everybody is on DeviantArt or ArtStation or whatever. It's other artists, and yeah, they probably have a better insight in terms of maybe what's successful or unsuccessful about something, or they can give you technical criticisms. But it's nice to have feedback from people who are reacting not as non-artists too, and it's also nice to be able to be a part of a community where people are appreciating you merely as spectators and lovers of art, and not necessarily other artists. Although I do think the vast majority of my followers everywhere are other artists. It's just the way communities tend to work. And it's so, when you get into those more, what do you call them? Those smaller spaces, those smaller communities, I think you can get more insight, but it's hard to sort of have a bigger picture feel for what my work is, how it's working, and where I sort of fit in the art community. But I don't know. I've always felt like I inhabit a strange place in the art community, because I have a lot of people from the illustration side of things, and I have a lot of friends from the fine art sort of community, and from comics and visual development and gaming, and there's a lot of overlap, and I'm not sure exactly like what I am sometimes, but it's interesting to see sort of the overlap in those communities and what we talk about.
Sounds like a good cross section.
Yeah.
These are the last two questions that I'll ask you. I do appreciate how generous you've been with your time. So
absolutely, thank you, Simon, for having me.
Oh no, I appreciate that. And these are questions that I had an art mentor for a year, and she taught me a lot of the principles of classical fine art draftsmanship. And she would ask me these every day, and I would see her almost every day for a year. And now this first one is a double barrel question. When she'd ask me, it's because I was always making a piece of art, and she'd ask me about the piece of art, but I've generalized it to the artist's work as opposed to something they're working on. So the question is, what do you like and what don't you like about your own artwork?
And that's an interesting question. I think when my art is a little too deliberate and it feels a little too practiced or safe or something like that, I feel like I get to those spots a lot where I'm not, it doesn't have this, there's a sort of a spontaneity or a life, an aliveness, if that's a word, that I want. And I frequently find myself frustrated that I'm not seeing that in a work. And then there is also sort of a point I reach in a lot of these drawings and sketches on site too, where I think I rush towards the end and I don't give the last third of the drawing, or at least the last third of the time spent on the drawing, the same level of engagement and attention as the first kind of 2/3. And I think that's an important stage in the development of a work. And sometimes I'm sort of eager to get out of there. And I want I need to slow down, because I'm torn between, I used to be extremely slow, and I've been trying to sort of speed up a little bit while kind of maintaining a level of facility and sort of accuracy, for whatever that means. But and it's tricky, because I wanted this sort of loose, spontaneous line quality, and that's one of the reasons I've started using the fountain pen and the Fude pen, and it's not as precise, and that's kind of good for somebody who I can be a very tight, sort of ponderous kind of artist sometimes. And I wanted to get away from that, and meeting so many other artists who were doing so many fun things and had a much more sort of a loose, open quality to their line. I wanted that, I was covetous of that kind of, and the speed that people could sketch. And I was like, I'm always sitting here for 3 hours and people are done in like 45 minutes. And what am I doing wrong? So that's something I find myself unhappy with frequently, is everything feeling labored. And then the other thing is, something I'm kind of happy about, is when things aren't feeling labored, and when things are feeling loose and energetic and alive. So, which has been more and more frequently. The good thing about that Chuck Jones quote is that you don't make all the bad art in a row and then you make good art in a row. It's more like 3 bad pieces and a good piece, 2 bad pieces, 2 good pieces, whatever. So eventually the good gets more and more frequent, but the bad never goes away. It's just, every now and then it'll crop up, those moments of frustration and, dissatisfaction. But I just have to keep aware of that and remember that's going to happen. And, just keep going.
Yeah. I have to apologize if you're hearing the intermittent seagull squawking.
Oh, no.
I'm right on the coast of North Wales, so we do have seagull hours.
I'm extremely jealous. I've never been to Wales, so
it's beautiful.
But
really beautiful.
Yes, that's what I hear. It's one of my the spots I'd love to visit. So,
well, if you ever do, reach out, please, and I'll
absolutely,
give you a tour of certain
absolutely.
spots. I've got one more question I need to ask. This is the big one as well. I've asked this to lots of artists. I've asked it to Kim Jung-yi before he sadly passed last year. I don't know if you're aware of who he is, but
yes.
Yeah, I got the opportunity to meet him in 2016, and then I asked him this question several times since, and his response is always hilarious. The question I just asked you, he made a meal of that as well. He really did. He'd only answer one half of it. He wouldn't say anything that he liked about his work, but made a meal out of saying what he didn't like, which was fascinating. The last question is, what's the most beautiful thing you've seen today?
It'll sound cliche, but it's my children. I think I can't say, one child, but every day I just it's one of the great joys of my life, and I don't if people are tired of me drawing my kids, I'm tough, because that's one thing I'm going to continue to do. But it's Linda comes downstairs and prepares breakfast, and it's my job to get them up and get them dressed. And they're 4 and 7, Juniper and Magnolia, and they're that's every day. I'd say they're probably the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. So if it sounds pat, or if it sounds a little cliche, but it's true.
No, it's lovely. It's lovely. And yeah, it's I hear it often from parents, which is beautiful. It's a lovely answer. Absolutely, it's very true. Well, before you go, is there anything that you'd like to promote at all? Because I will put all your social media and any links, but is there anything that you'd like to shout out specifically for the viewers to check out?
I am going to be doing a workshop. There's a few spots left. We're closing in on a handful. It's an urban sketching Southwest retreat in Santa Fe, New Mexico, April 13th through the 17th through Madeline Island School of the Arts. And I'm teaching with Sherry Blockoff, Uma Kelkar, and James Richards. So it's a sort of a 4-person crew. This is the 3rd year we've taught together, and we love teaching together. It's a week-long workshop. We've had an amazing time. The previous 2 workshops we've taught were in Wisconsin, on an island off the coast of Lake Superior. So this will be a new destination for us, all new sort of challenges. And Santa Fe is a beautiful city in the Southwest, the American Southwest. Gorgeous. If you've never been, you should go. Beautiful, adobe buildings everywhere, and we're excited to do it. So if anybody is thinking of something they'd like to do, a spring excursion, there's a few spots left. So that's my plug. What
will you be covering in the?
I'm going to be covering sort of the nature of keeping a sketchbook habit. So my workshop is all about getting into that space, that headspace of being ready to sketch anytime, anywhere, and feeling comfortable, sort of pursuing that. Because there's a little bit of intimidation that happens once, you take your art practice out into the world. Most of us, I think, are comfortable drawing at home, but once you go out in a cafe or out into a crowded square, and you start laying pen to paper or paint to paper, there's a level of intimidation there for some folks. So we'll talk all about the nature of that and how to make it a part of your life and feel sort of like an organic thing to pursue.
Fantastic. Well, I highly recommend everyone check that out, as well as all of the links down below. I'll be making sure that we've got links to the book for sale, or the several books for sale, as well as all the social media links and accounts. I want to thank you so much for your time. It's been a fantastic guest.
Thank you. That was wonderful. Wonderful. Great questions. Thank you, Simon.
Thank you. Okay, so that is the episode done. Now, he was such a fantastic guest. I was really privileged to talk to him. And since then, I've actually discussed with him and partly arranged a conversation as part of a new format that I'm working on. What I'm doing at the moment is having 2 guests on at once, 2 artists, to talk with each other, and I kind of host the conversation. I've done this with Peter Draws and Scott Teplin, and I've booked several other artists, one of whom is Paul Heaston, and there's going to be another guest with him that will be quite exciting, so I will announce that once it's recorded, and these will start being uploaded. I'm still trying to think of the name for this format, but whatever it is, I will let you know on this channel. So if you're not already, please leave a like, comment down below, subscribe to the channel, ring the notification bell, share this with friends and family to help the channel grow. Support Paul on all of his social media links. They're going to be in the description below. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in the next episode.